North Dakota's Legacy Fund houses more than $8 billion. Established to benefit the state, the fund is governed by the State Investment Board, but managed by San Francisco-based investment firm Callan, a firm haunted by conflict of interest scandals and questionable investments. Join Josh Meny as he explores Callan's influence on the SIB, how they've lost track of investments, and why funding is still not available to North Dakota businesses. North Dakota Legacy Fund. Who's in control? Tonight at 10 on KX News. Putting North Dakota first. KX News at 10 starts now.
Good evening, I'm Brooke Williams.
And I'm Nicholas Pollack. Thank you for watching KX News.
North Dakota's Legacy Fund has been called the People's Fund. It's filled with our tax dollars, over $8 billion worth.
But those tax dollars are flowing into investments out of North Dakota and out of our country. It's governed by North Dakota's State Investment Board, or SIB, and advised by consultant firm Callan, which has no offices in North Dakota.
Through monthly taxes on the state's oil production and returns on investments, the Legacy Fund has been growing for more than 11 years, and taxpayers are weighing in. In a statewide survey conducted by WPA Intelligence, a leading national research firm, taxpayers by a 10-to-1 margin want a greater portion of the Legacy Fund invested in North Dakota.
And by an 8-to-1 margin, they want North Dakota advisors to decide on how to invest the money, not out of state or by Wall Street consultants. Overwhelming support by the legislature for a bill aimed at reinvesting in the state shows that most lawmakers agree North Dakota would be better served if more Legacy Fund monies were put to use in our own state for such things as economic development.
Josh Meny has been investigating for the last several months, attempting to shed light on the power struggle that's ensued over the Legacy Fund. Josh?
That's right, Nicholas and Brooke. The public really matters here. Tonight's report explores to what degree is the will of the public and legislature being factored into how the fund is being invested. And if that's open to debate, then who's in control?
In July of 2020, Fargo Forum investigative reporter Patrick Springer published an article outlining Legacy Fund investments in questionable foreign entities. It got Fargo attorney Luke Heck's attention.
Then it prompted me to do a Freedom of Information Act request or open records request to the State Investment Board.
Heck got back a spreadsheet from the State Investment Board showing all of the Legacy Fund's investments from fiscal year 2019-2020.
At the pure volume and scope of the investments that we have out of state and out of country, and some of the shady locations that we are invested in businesses and governmental entities across the globe.
66 pages of fine print showing foreign investments spanning 89 countries. 37 different Chinese investments alone, most of which are linked to the Chinese Communist Party. One investment that stood out to Heck, a $12 million investment in Tencent, a Chinese social media app.
And what's relevant about that is that application was used or assisted in the Chinese government tracking the Uyghur Muslim ethnic minority population in China. And for those who aren't aware, the Uyghur population has been basically abducted and transported to concentration camps and are being housed and forced to hard labor. And so, in essence, the state's funds are getting used to invest in a company that's assisting the Chinese government, Chinese Communist government, in basically committing potential genocide.
In addition to China, the Legacy Fund is invested in Russia, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and other government entities and companies on the Human Rights Watch list. Not only is much of the Legacy Fund principal invested out of our country's border, it's essentially invested everywhere but North Dakota. Just ask North Dakota Bankers Association President Rick Clayberg.
Literally billions of dollars that are invested, North Dakota dollars that are invested outside of the state of North Dakota. Why couldn't a portion of those dollars be put under management here in North Dakota with banks that have trust powers?
Clayberg has been working with legislators since 2012 to try to get some of the Legacy Fund monies managed by North Dakota banks with trust powers.
Our banks never really got the opportunity to ever put in a bid to manage any of the dollars. And that was one of the frustrations that we had. We really appreciate what the legislature did with the governor signing 1425.
In written testimony, Heck asked the State Investment Board to consider the benefits of investing the legacy fund's principal locally before investing out of state or out of country. Instead of considering the merits of investing in-state, Heck wrote, quote, "The board has engaged 32 Wall Street money management firms to invest our principal anywhere but within North Dakota."
Back in the late summer of 2020, North Dakota Insurance Commissioner John Gottfried began publicly discussing his plan to reinvest 10% of the legacy fund back into the state. Gottfried took his proposal to the board. It didn't even get a vote. That's when Gottfried teamed up with Representative Meny to put his plan in the form of House Bill 1425. By shedding light on all of the foreign investments in the legacy fund, it got the legislature's attention. And then House Bill 1425 got overwhelming support. In the House, 85-8, and in the Senate, 47-0.
They saw the public support for the bill, they saw the support in the legislature for the bill, and they tried to get out ahead of this thing.
Here's the hitch. Representative Meny says when House Bill 1425 was gaining momentum in the legislature, the State Investment Board established their own in-state investing program, knowing that the legislature had broad support for in-state investing.
These minutes and memos shows that during the legislative campaign for House Bill 1425, between late September and late October, the State Investment Board created their own in-state investing program. The State Investment Board asked out-of-state investment firm Callan to search for money managers for the in-state investment program ahead of House Bill 1425. Callan brought 4 firms forward, none from inside the state, and the State Investment Board picked Chicago firm 50 South Capital, once again frustrating in-state banks.
The actions that were taken by the advisory board and by Rio and those involved as far as naming Callan and 50 South, you're right, they were trying to get ahead of the game. So they came up with their own in-state investment program, all while this bill is going through the legislative process.
Sunday on KX News at 10, for the next segment, we will look deeper into the power struggle surrounding North Dakota's legacy fund.
And again, the banking industry is frustrated, private industry is frustrated, investors out there that are frustrated that nothing is happening. And it's a feeling that we all feel right now.
Did the State Investment Board make any changes to the legacy fund's foreign investments after so much attention and controversy was stirred up last year to help support the passage of House Bill 1425? We'll show you Sunday on KX News at 10.
Thank you, Josh. We did reach out to Callan for comment on this story. They responded with a letter, but requested KX News keep all its content confidential.
$8 billion. It's an enormous sum sitting in the North Dakota Legacy Fund. Those controlling the investment of the $8 billion, a small group of 12. The State Investment Board is made up of high-ranking state officials like the Lieutenant Governor, the State Treasurer, the Director of Workforce Safety and Insurance, and other appointed members. The SIB is advised by Callan, an out-of-state firm who's worked with the state for decades. And taxpayers are weighing in. In a statewide survey conducted by WPA Intelligence, a leading national research firm, taxpayers by a 10-to-1 margin want a greater portion of the legacy fund invested in North Dakota. And by an 8-to-1 margin, they want North Dakota advisors to decide how to invest the money, not out-of-state or Wall Street consultants. KX News anchor Josh Meny joins us now to discuss the power struggle behind the rollout of an in-state investing program using legacy fund dollars.
That's right, Maddie. In part 1, we looked at how an investigation of the legacy fund's foreign investments for fiscal year 2019-2020, showing the fund is essentially invested everywhere but North Dakota, helped sway the public and legislature to support an in-state investment program through House Bill 1425. For tonight's report, we ask, has the State Investment Board gotten out of any of those controversial foreign investments for this fiscal year?
Representative Keith Kempenick is chairman of the Legacy and Budget Stabilization Fund Advisory Board. I sat down with Kempenick to ask him questions about the Legacy Fund's foreign investments.
What is the State Investment Board doing about not investing in accounts that are connected with Alibaba, which was banned in the United States by the Trump administration, and
investments that are linked to the Communist Chinese Party and the Russian government.
Well, like I said, yeah, there's Alibaba, Wahoo was another, and we weren't in any of those.
However, Kempenik is misinformed. Fiscal year 2019-2020 documents show Alibaba was the largest foreign holding in the legacy fund and the 8th largest fund holding overall. SIB invested nearly $15 million into this one Chinese company alone. KX News filed a Freedom of Information Act request to the State Investment Board for this year's fiscal year 2021 report, which shows that North Dakota's legacy fund is invested in Alibaba even more at near $20 million.
Did you know that the legacy fund, North Dakota's People's Fund, was invested in accounts linked to the Chinese Communist Party and even linked to an account that facilitates the oppression of the Uyghur people in China?
No, and see, that was one of the things that, like I said, we don't get into those details and truthfully, I'm guessing that we probably don't have much in China right now.
Documents again show to the contrary. In fiscal year 2019-2020, foreign investments show that $12 million was invested into Tencent, the Chinese company that makes the social media app WeChat. International headlines show that the app was used as a tool by the Chinese Communist Party to surveil and suppress the Uyghur minority group in China. For this fiscal year, 2020-2021, the SIB more than doubled down on their investment into Tencent at nearly $26 million. The Legacy Fund also has nearly $1 million invested in the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, a competitor to North Dakota's petroleum industry.
The companies in question that were kind of brought to light last year and stuff that were kind of on a watch list and stuff, we weren't invested in.
Again, the 2019-2020 documents show investments in several countries on the human rights watch list. In addition to China, they include Russia, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, Serbia, Croatia, Colombia, Morocco, Nigeria, and others. And the Legacy Fund remains invested in those countries today. Representative Bernie Satrom was an early proponent of getting the Legacy Fund invested into North Dakota.
I had lunch with the military fellow that's in the military recently, and I said, "What would you think about the idea of investing North Dakota funds in Russia or China?" It was interesting. He wasn't looking at it necessarily from a financial standpoint, but he said, from a military standpoint, sounds a lot like aiding and abetting.
Satrom helped spread awareness of the scope of the foreign investments as a way to gain momentum for House Bill 1425.
So what if we make a lot of money with some Chinese company that's ripping people off and doing the wrong thing? I don't think any North Dakotans would stand for that. And I think as legislators, you're going to be hearing a lot more in the next session and the days to come.
As we explained in Part 1, the State Investment Board created their own in-state investment program. SIB chose one of the firms recommended by Callan, 50 South Capital, which is also located out of state, to manage 3% of the equity portion of House Bill 1425 that will streamline the process for in-state investing. And with the special session starting on November 8th, Representative Nathy confirms he's moving to write new language in House Bill 1425. That will be voted on by the legislature during the special session.
In Part 3, we'll examine the process in which Callan recommends money managers. Stay tuned for that and the latest in the ongoing power struggle to make legacy fund dollars accessible to in-state investing.
Thanks, Josh. And we have reached out to Callan for comment on this story. They responded with a letter but requested KX News keep all content confidential.
Good evening, I'm Brooke Williams.
And I'm Nicholas Pollack. Thank you for watching KX News. Last month, we reported that the State Investment Board is advised by out-of-state company Callan LLC. We also reported that Callan recommends other out-of-state firms to invest the taxpayers' money from our more than $8 billion legacy fund. And we reported on how these firms invest legacy fund dollars everywhere but North Dakota.
Tonight in Part 3 of our series, anchor Josh Meny digs into Callan's influence over the State Investment Board and the legislature's advisory board, and into why some documents Callan provided in response to Treasurer Beadle's inquiry have not been made public.
KX News recently asked Representative Keith Kempenik, who is the former chair of the Legacy Fund Advisory Board, how much control Callan has over the State Investment Board.
Callan doesn't have any control on the State Investment Board. They don't have any control on the advisory board.
Kempenich says Callen only advises the board, but by looking at votes recorded in previous minutes going back 2 years, we've been unable to find any recommendations that did not get an 11-0 vote. As you see in these minutes, motion after motion, it's the same 11-0 vote, and it goes on like this. We also asked Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, who chairs the State Investment Board, for his explanation for the 11-0 votes. Can you explain why every vote always goes 11-0 with Callen's recommendations?
Well, we would hope that with the Rio staff and the State Investment Board being involved from the beginning of the process to the end, that you'd have good selections at the end for investment manager decisions. And that might be terminating an investment manager, that might be hiring a new investment manager, that might be changing an asset allocation. But what a consultant does for the pension plan, for the sovereign wealth funds, for the state investment boards is they help with how you manage the direction given by the client boards. Whether it's pension funds, say, invest 60% in equities, and legacy funds says 50% equities, then we have to hire the investment managers to invest those funds. And so those are the conversations that happen with Rio staff, with State Investment Board itself, and Callen assists in that. And then it brings it forward.
An article earlier this year in the Fargo Forum said the state has retained Callen for more than 30 years without subjecting the firm to a competitive bidding process. When did Callen officially start working with the state?
I'm assuming they were predating the legacy fund.
Callen is the state's chief investment advisor, yet we've not been able to find any record of Callen advising the state that their own contract should be rebid on a regular basis. Shortly after taking office earlier this year, newly elected state treasurer Thomas Beadle asked Callen questions about the company's past problems in other states. Beadle, who also sits on the State Investment Board, said he wanted to, quote, make sure we have transparency and accountability, and to make sure our taxpayers have confidence in this outcome.
These are questions they've had to answer for decades, especially since some of the accusations before.
Beadle specifically asked about pay-to-play allegations. Pay-to-play is the practice of money management firms using financial arrangements outside of the bidding or selection process that may give one company an advantage over another. Reports from 2002 to 07 indicated Callen faced lawsuits and investigations suggesting possible conflict of interest or pay-to-play arrangements with pension funds and other localities. However, KX News has not found any current lawsuits or investigations regarding Callen. A month after Treasurer Beadle sent his letter to Callen, the Fargo Forum reported that nearly all of the legacy fund money managers that Callen recommended for work in North Dakota paid Callen's educational arm for research and other services. And in their response to Treasurer Beadle's questions, which is posted on our website, kxnet.com, Callen acknowledged receiving these payments, but claimed the payments do not influence who they recommend to invest our legacy fund monies. Callen's response provided a list of the current legacy fund firms that pay Callen, but asked the information be kept confidential. The document with that information, identified as Attachment E, is somewhere in the offices of the State Investment Board. But KX News has found no record of it ever being provided to the public. So the question remains, do the firms that pay Callen the most money get the most work in North Dakota? Attachment E would help us answer that question if it's released. KX News has reached out to Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford and other members of the State Investment Board asking for the release of Attachment E and other financial information. However, the SIB says the information is confidential under the North Dakota Records Act because fees paid by the investment managers to Callen constitute confidential commercial and financial information under the law. They instead directed us to a report prepared by Callen, which provides no specific fee information. A link to the information found in the 2020 report is available on our website. At this point, the state's position remains the same. The public does not have a right to know if the firms that pay Callen the most get the most work in North Dakota. Why does an out-in-state firm such as Callen have a say in whether that information is public or not?
It's the contractual agreement with Callen and the State Investment Board and the Rio office. And if it was an in-state firm, if one of our investment firms could bid for this work, I would venture a guess that it would be a very similar agreement from them as well.
Why are you opposed to releasing that as public information?
I'm not opposed to anything that's legal. And so this is not legal from everything that's been given to us by the Attorney General's office, by our executive director, by staff. It's not legal for us to do so within the contractual arrangements with the consultants.
We looked at the confidentiality provision of the contract and confirmed that the SIB is required to protect information covered by any specific exemption under the Open Records Law. In this case, they said the confidential commercial and financial information exemption applies. So long as the SIB asserts the exemption to the Open Records Law, we and you will never know the amounts those consultants recommended by Callen pay Callen for other services. Reporting in Bismarck for KX News, I'm Josh Meny.